make this as nasty as it can be. Seeing all the blood doesn't really bother me.
There's a certain schizophrenia that goes into all of this.
There's no rivalry like this one. And that's the way it'll be unless they decide to move, because we're not.
For over 300 years, the history of North Carolina has been written proudly and spoken modestly. Within the mountains and foothills of the old North State is a social landscape touched by secession and reconstruction, segregation and civil progress. And while the state's commitment to agriculture links it to its rural heritage, modern history has been authored by young men with jump shots, interpreted through the steady bounce of a basketball. And with the sport embedded in the culture, a battle for hoop supremacy has been waged by two universities separated by a mere 8 miles of Tobacco Road. The North Carolina Tar Heels versus the Duke Blue Devils is a rivalry defined by proximity, excellence, and devotion undaunted. Both are among the 4 winningest programs in the history of the sport, with 7 NCAA titles and 31 Final Four appearances between them. 2 powerhouse programs, improbably bound by location, whose struggle is the heartbeat of college basketball, a backyard game played on the national stage. North Carolina won the inaugural meeting of these schools in 1920, and 17 of the first 19. The matchups were split during the 30s and 40s, but they were low-scoring, plodding affairs that were largely ignored in favor of the state's preferred pastime.
Football absolutely ruled, and the glory years of Duke football were as glorious as anything that's ever happened in basketball.
In the 30s, Duke with Wallace Wade played in 2 Rose Bowls. Carolina in the 40s, they had the legendary Choo-Choo Justice. Football was king. Basketball was played, but it was a secondary thing, something to do in the winter when it was too cold to play spring football.
While pigskin reigned supreme in Carolina, ironically, it was a shrewd decision by perennial tackling dummies NC State that set up basketball's most heated rivalry.
They were getting whipped every year by Duke and Carolina both, and they decided, well,
Let's put our money and our effort into basketball. We'll be the best basketball program in the area. And went out and hired Everett Case, who came from Indiana. His first 10 years at NC State, they won 9 conference championships. He made State the dominant basketball power.
Looking to halt a 15-game losing streak to NC State, North Carolina hired Frank McGuire before the 1953 season. The dapper New Yorker with the fancy suits and patent leather shoes had led St. John's to the Final Four in '52 and immediately began attracting New York City talent to Chapel Hill. Bronx native Lenny Rosenbluth was the first to come through McGuire's Underground Railroad and was soon joined by Tommy Kearns, Pete Brennan, Joe Quigg, and Bob Cunningham. The 4 Catholics and a Jew, as they were affectionately called, led the Tar Heels to an undefeated regular season and back-to-back triple overtime thrillers in the Final Four. UNC entered the second as underdogs to Wilt Chamberlain's powerhouse Kansas. But the sly McGuire had a few tricks up his cufflink sleeves.
Chamberlain's jumping center for Kansas, 7-1. He says Tommy Kearns out. It's 5-11.
Wilt has got his hands on his hips, looking down at me in some kind of disgust. He said, "What are you doing here?"
he didn't know what to make of it, and McGuire said, well, maybe he'll think we're a little nuts. And Chamberlain really was pretty much out of the game in the first half.
On the opening moments, Kansas is off its stride. The star, Wilt Chamberlain, is held to a mere 6 goals.
The rest is history. We had a flight from Kansas to Raleigh. The pilot did a circle around the airport an extra time or 2 because there were 12 or 15,000 people at the airport. You're a 20-year-old kid, and all of a sudden we became folk heroes.
That was the beginning of what we still know today as the excitement of ACC basketball. That triggered it.
McGuire's miracle put ACC football in the shadows for good. But Duke basketball was floundering. So in 1959, it hired Vic Bubas. The former Everett Case assistant was chosen for his reputation as a recruiter, and he struck quickly with the poaching of Long Island's Art Heyman.
Artie Heyman and myself signed at the same time to go to Carolina. We were rivals in high school.
He was at Long Beach High School, and I was at Oceanside High School. Everybody from New York, Brooklyn was going down to Carolina, and I signed my scholarship papers there.
Heyman's stepfather hated Frank McGuire. They got into a fight one night at the Carolina Inn in Chapel Hill.
They were screaming and ready to come to blows.
And Heyman's stepfather decided that Art was not going to go to Carolina.
Bubas, like a shark with blood in the water. He swoops in, and within a week of taking the job at Duke, he's taking Art Heyman away from North Carolina.
Well, you can imagine the bad feelings that caused.
They hated me. Art Heyman sucks.
Oh, he was a jerk, but a great, great player.
They couldn't believe I was Jewish because I was so tough. They thought they were tailors and lawyers.
Heyman's heritage and cocksure attitude attracted trouble from the start. In his first freshman game against the Tar Heels, Heyman was sent to the hospital after a blindside punch. Later that year, in an era when only the conference champion went on to the NCAA tournament, Duke spoiled Carolina's season by upsetting the heavily favored Tar Heels en route to the conference crown. The following season, the kid who had spurned Frank McGuire helped set the rivalry ablaze.
Coach McGuire yelled to me, just drive it to the goal and lay it in. And I drove it, and I got clotheslined.
He threw the ball at me, he swung at me, and all hell broke loose. It was a riot.
People were coming from every angle, you couldn't see anything. But I remember Doug Modek and the captain of the Duke football team.
When they got into it, they were right in front of the North Carolina bench. Art swears to this day that a pair of the shoes that was kicking him were alligator shoes with tassels. Frank McGuire did not forget easily.
Before I jumped up, I took my fist and hit him right in the balls. And McGuire, when I was playing with the Knicks, he became the coach of South Carolina. And he walked over to me and says, "Artie, it still hurts." And he put his hand by his chops. "Artie, it still hurts."
He got hit right in the eye by Jones. Oh, we got a fight over here. That Doherty.
No adversaries in any other rivalry, in any other sport, are as uneasily acquainted as the Tar Heels and the Blue Devils. They are not of neighboring states or neighboring cities. They are simply neighbors who view the world through a prism with varying shades of blue.
My freshman year, I had a Duke t-shirt that I had gotten on a recruiting trip, and it must have been the end of my laundry cycle. So I wore the Duke t-shirt one day on campus, and at the end of class, I was back in my room. There was a bang at the door, and the next thing I knew, there were 10 Carolina basketball players carrying me down the stairway and into the pool out in front of the dormitory. At that point, I realized there's something different going on here.
When we look at it, we always say, Duke is a great college school. None of their guys come out and become great players in the pros because they don't have that in their blood. So there was no love lost at all. And even to this day, that still is ingrained in all Carolina guys. It's no way you're going to like anything about Duke.
I would root for the minions of hell before I would root for Carolina.
You have two of the storied basketball programs in the history of our sport, and then you place them 8 miles apart. Something crazy is going to happen.
People are going to offices. Some are Duke graduates, some are North Carolina graduates. You have marriages, one from Duke, one North Carolina.
Being at restaurants and having people send you over a drink and, making a wisecrack with it, or having somebody wave their Carolina flag at you.
You see license plates that are divided down the middle and half light blue with a UNC and half dark blue with a D on it. They call them the house divided. They get along just fine, all but about 2 days a year.
You can win the national championship, but if you lose the head-to-head matchup, the national championship doesn't mean anything down in the Raleigh-Durham area. The first time we beat them, we went over to Chapel Hill. We were looking for a party. It was for bragging rights.
It's bragging rights. We go to the same restaurants and stuff, share the same barbershop.
The sky's light blue. You would never see a devil in heaven. Hey, and don't you forget that.
You know two kind of people wear that kind of blue? Girls and babies. Which one are you?
I go to get my haircut at the time when I had it, you know, and Johnny Dawkins is sitting in the chair, and Tommy Amaker. And the good thing about being in North Carolina, everyone's North Carolina fans first. So I could walk into the barbershop and be like, oh, Kenny's next. And that would eat them. I know that would eat them up. We represent not just the university. On our chest, it says North Carolina. It's hard to beat that.
Duke fans are the minority, and it's not ever going to come close to being a majority. I don't care if they win 15 national championships. This is a baby blue state.
You grow up with it from the moment you're born. You are so wrapped up in it from a young age. It is tied to your family. It's such an integral part of you.
It was defined early to me as kind of a moral allegory almost. This is something that is so built in that it is a visceral thing.
An identity as North Carolinians. People have been known to take a week off after their team loses and just sort of, huddle in their bedroom.
We were indoctrinated. And literally, the very first song that I ever remember learning was Don't Give a Damn for Duke University. I'm from Carolina.
There are more North Carolina fans in every town in North Carolina, including Durham, the home base of the Blue Devils.
There were times we would lose a game and I'd go get a bagel on campus and the person serving my bagel would talk junk to me. And I'm like, aren't we on Duke's campus right now? Can I get a break? We live behind enemy lines.
It's the local versus the outsider. It's the public versus the private. It's the rich versus the middle class.
Carolina is a public university. It's the oldest state-sponsored university in the country. Something like 85% of their students are North Carolinians.
The University of the People, a place where boys and girls from little towns in North Carolina can come and can pull themselves up from nothing and make a name for themselves.
Duke, on the other hand, is a very small, very elite school with a real attitude.
So it doesn't really seem like a North Carolina school. It seems somehow alien.
The average Carolinian thinks of Duke as a rich person's province. Duke embodies success. Moving on up. Students are mostly out of state.
You have the obnoxious New Jersey Yankees from the north infiltrating the southern territories.
This is North versus South, except the North and South are 8 miles away from each other.
I was an assistant coach to Frank McGuire. He said, I'm going in to tell the chancellor I'm leaving to go pro and tell him that he should hire you. And unfortunately, Chancellor Aycock told him he'd already decided to hire me. And 10 years ago, he wrote me a letter saying the 2 best moves I ever made was to marry my wife and hire me. And that's the nicest thing anybody ever said about it.
In the wake of recruiting violations and a point-shaving scandal, Frank McGuire was replaced in 1961 by 30-year-old assistant Dean Smith. The native Kansan had a reputation as a class act who stressed education. He went 8-9 in his first season and lost his first 7 games to Duke. Though his primary task was keeping a clean program, it was of little consolation to UNC students. After a lopsided defeat to Wake Forest in 1965, they let Smith know he was not in Kansas anymore.
We came back on the bus, and there was a commotion outside, students chanting something, and we didn't know what.
They had hung Coach Smith in effigy. When the bus pulled up, everybody saw it.
Billy Cunningham was a big-time All-American at the time. He tore off that bus, he ripped that thing off the tree, and he let those kids have it.
Obviously, that's something that you can't miss, but I didn't say a word. I just told him to take tomorrow off. I'll bring you in individually and we'll talk about it, because we have Duke coming up. I said, I know after today, watch, we're going to play Duke very well.
A few days later, they upset Duke, and there were throngs of fans out there cheering for him, and he refused to speak. He said, you know, my neck feels a little tight. I can't talk.
I guess that comes with the territory. I haven't been hung in effigy since.
The program under Dean Smith